had a safe trip. She got to see a bunch of family and everything. We are continuing our study in Nehemiah. We've already looked at chapters 1 and 2. Today we're going to look very briefly in chapter 3 and then go through chapter 4. Nehemiah had it on his heart when he found out that Jerusalem was in disarray, that the walls were down, the buildings were down, the gates were non-existent, and it touched his heart. And he prayed to God. Remember, he got immediately down on his knees and prayed to God for days to help him do something. And so God put it in his heart to go to Jerusalem. Remember, he was just a cupbearer for the king. And he went to the king, and the king gave him permission to do this. Gave him the letters that he needed to get from where they were at, the 800 miles down to Jerusalem without any hassle. Gave him letters to give to the king, the ruler of the king's forest, so he could get all the wood that he needed to rebuild Jerusalem. And so now we're picking up. Remember, last week we looked at this, that Nehemiah went out at night riding his donkey and came out of the valley gate, rode across into the dung gate. I don't know if you can see this little pool here. This is the king's pool. Couldn't get through there because of all the debris. He came out of the fountain gate and came back around into the valley gate. Today, there's a lot in chapter 3, and again, I encourage you to read it if you want to. There's only 3 places or 4 places on here that are mentioned that are actually on this map. We're going to look at today, and that is going the wrong direction. The sheep gate, the tower of Hananiel, the fish gate, and then this area here of Ophel, the Ophel Tower and the projecting tower. We're going to read about this section here and this section of wall. So just keep that in the back of your mind as we go through this study. So going to Nehemiah 3, I want to look at, I'm sorry, I went the wrong direction. Not the wrong direction, but I didn't mean to hit that. Going into Nehemiah 3, I'm only going to look at 4 scriptures this morning. I'm not going to put them up here because there's just little short sections, and I want you to be able to see the map. In Nehemiah 3, verse 1, then Eliashib, the high priest, rose up with his brothers, the priest, and they built the sheep gate. They consecrated it and set its doors. They consecrated it as far as the Tower of 100 and as far as the Tower of Hananiel. Okay, so we're starting off with the high priest and the priest have come out, and it might be because the temple is right there. A lot of the people, when they built close to their houses and things. So the priests have taken this, I'm going to call the northern rim, and have worked on this section. The high priest and the priest are doing something that they normally wouldn't do. You know, back then, the high priest and the priest dealt strictly with the temple. They're not carpenters. Yes, they had to put the temple together whenever it traveled. But these are not carpenters. They're not men who work with their hands. But they have stepped up to do what is right for their city, for the city of God, for Jerusalem. We cannot think of ourselves as too high or too good or too old to do the Lord's work, as we're going to see down through this chapter. Verse 3, the sons of Hananiah built the fish gate. They laid its beams and set its doors, its bolts, and its bars. Verse 5, and I like this verse, and next to them the Tekoites repaired. Being from Tekoa, it's nice to know that, our predecessors worked on Jerusalem. But the Tekoites repaired, but their nobles would not stoop to serve their Lord. So here we see the nobles, the higher ranking, looking down your nose, have on all the servants. They were too good to work on Jerusalem. And I have seen people, I've heard people, they've told me, that I'm too old now to do anything around the church building. I've had my time. It's time for the younger people to step up and to work. Nowhere in the Bible do we see a cutoff, of age. Jack, he was talking about how he was starting a Bible study up in his apartment building. Ruth, for those of you who remember Ruth, I think she was 93. Ended up being confined to a wheelchair. She'd call me all the times asking what she could do around the church. And she took it upon herself. She wanted to meet and greet everybody, and she would get the bulletins, and she'd sit there and hand out the bulletins to everybody that walked in and wanted to do Bible studies with people. There is no cutoff. We can't be too good to do the Lord's work. As you read down through chapter 3, you will see where goldsmiths, perfumers, the ruler of half the district of Jerusalem, they repaired, he and his daughters. So it wasn't just the men. They've got the kids out there working. Rulers, the priests, the men of the surrounding area around Jerusalem, were coming to Jerusalem to do the work. Residents of Jerusalem helped in the repairs beside their own homes. The temple servants living in the Ophel area, that green circle, repaired, and the merchants repaired. So it's not just men, it's just not people who work with their hands, but it's jewelry people, perfumers, merchants, residents. They are all pitching in to do the work of God. And that's how we need to be, brothers and sisters, when it comes time to do things for the world, for the world and for the Lord. When there's stuff to be done around here, and I'm really thankful that we have the people who will step up and work outside and work in the building and clean the kitchen and organize it and everything else. It's things that need to be done. We shouldn't be like the nobles from Tico and say, no, we're too good for that. Verse 27, after him, the Tekoites, again, repaired another section and opposite the great projecting tower, which you see right there in the middle of that green circle, as far as the wall of Ophel. They rebuilt it and set its doors, its bolts, and its bars, and repaired 1,000 cubits of the wall. Remember, a cubic is your elbow to your tips of your fingers, which is about, I think it's 18 inches. And that comes out to about 1,500 feet or 5 football fields. So I'm assuming that that's going to be that outer section of the wall. It doesn't say, it just said that in that area. I don't know how many of you dealt with youths and went to youth rallies or camps or whatever, but there's a song that we used to sing all the time that really hangs true to me, and it only takes a spark to get a fire going. And soon all those around can warm up to its glowing. Nehemiah had a spark. He had a burning desire to rebuild Jerusalem and its walls and its gates. And because of his enthusiasm, because of his spark, we see not only the people of Jerusalem, the priest of Jerusalem, the people around Jerusalem have come together because of his spark to rebuild Jerusalem. So let's go on. I'm just having problems with this thing this morning. Okay, so before we get into Nehemiah, I want to first look at Genesis 3, verses 1 through 5. We've studied these verses before, but I think it ties into what we're going to be looking at this morning. Now the serpent was more crafty than any other beast of the field that the Lord had made. And I want us to remember who this serpent is, what this serpent is. This serpent is Satan. This serpent is the devil. It's not just a snake that's, crawling around in the Garden of Eden. The serpent said to the woman, "Did God actually say you should not eat of any tree in the garden?" And the woman said to the serpent, we may eat of the fruit of the trees in the garden, but God said, you shall not eat of the fruit of the tree that is in the midst of the garden, neither shall you touch it, lest you die. But the serpent said to the woman, you will not surely die, for God knows that when you eat of it, your eyes will be opened, and you will be like God, knowing good and evil. Is what the devil is telling Eve true? Yes, it is. Okay. Has he twisted it a little bit to make it sound good and no evil portion to it? Yes, he does. And that's what the devil does. He takes the truth and twists it for his own doings. And I want you to remember this as we go through today and see what happens. Nehemiah 4, verses 1 and 2. Now here they are again. Now when Sanballat heard that we were building the wall, he was angry and greatly enraged, and he jeered at the Jews. In steps the devil. Does not say that, but as we go through and read what happens and what he does and what he says, you're going to see what we just read in Genesis 3 picking up. So he jeered at the Jews, verse 2. And he said, in the presence of his brothers and of the army of Samaria. Okay? Sometimes when you're doing something wrong, you need people to back you up. You need that riot. One person by himself usually doesn't get very far, but if he can incite the people around him to help him, he can get a lot more accomplished. So he's talking to in the presence of his brothers in the army of Samaria. What are these feeble Jews doing? Let's talk them down first. Okay? Will they restore it for themselves? Remember, there's a big battle going on between the Samaritans and the Jews. Will they sacrifice? And I don't know if he's talking about sacrifices, holy sacrifices, or if they're going to talk about, the people sacrificing to do all this work. They're not working in their shops. They're not selling things at the stores. They're sacrificing themselves to help, which sometimes we need to do that. We need to forget what we had planned for Saturday because there's something else that we need to do for God. Will they finish it up in a day? There's too much to have to do to finish it up in a day. So again, he is talking down to the Jews. Will they revive the stones out of the heaps of rubbish and burnt ones at that? Okay. So he is definitely riling these guys up to go against the Jews because of what it is that they are doing, which he disagrees with. Verses 3 through 5. Tobiah the Amorite was beside him, and we heard about Tobiah last week. And he said, he's getting in on the bandwagon. Yes, what are they building? If a fox goes up on it, he will break down their stone wall. They don't even know what they're doing. They're not carpenters. They're not masonry. They don't know what they're doing. If a fox walks across it, it's all going to crumble. Verse 4, hear, O our God. This is Nehemiah talking. And I like the way they specify our God. When I looked it up, and we'll get that here in a minute, the Samaritans and the Jews had the same God. Okay, they believed in the same God, but it's how they believed. O our God, for we are despised, turn back their taunt on their own heads and give them to be plundered in a land where they are captives. Do not cover their guilt, and let not their sin be blotted out from your sight, for they have provoked you to anger in the presence of the builders. Okay? So again, the differences between the Samaritan and the Jews include religious text. The Samaritans only accepted the first 5 books called the Pentateuch, okay, as the Holy Scripture, where Jews accepted the whole Hebrew Bible. Their lineage. Jews can trace their lineage back through the patriarchs of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, associated with the southern kingdom of Judah. In contrast, the Samaritans believe that they descended from the tribe of Ephraim and Manasseh, linked to the northern tribe of Israel. Place of worship. The Jews worshipped on Mount Zion in Jerusalem. as their dwelling place, whereas the Samaritans believed in the Mount Gerizim near Shechem. And remember, we saw that when we looked at the story of Jesus and the Samaritan woman. They were differentiating these places of worship. Okay. Verse 6. So we built the wall, and all the wall was joined together to half its height, for the people had a mind to work. So whatever the height was, we'll just say 10 feet, they made it up to 5 feet. But 5 feet is better than no feet. 5 feet is better than a pile of rubble. So the people have gotten together and they have rebuilt the wall to half its height, and they've rebuilt all the gates. Why? Because they had a mind to work. They had a mind to do God's will. They had a mind to follow this idea, this spark that Nehemiah had. It was a good thing, and we're going to follow it, and we're going to do it, and we're going to see it through. Verses 7 through 9. But when Sanballat and Tobiah and the Arabs and of the Amorites and the Ashdodites heard that the repairing of the walls of Jerusalem was going forward, and that the breaches were beginning to be closed, they were very angry. These people are not listening to us. They're not listening to our taunts and our jeers. They are coming together as a whole and doing this. Jerusalem was bigger and better than Samaria. They don't want this to come back to be. Verse 8. And they all plotted together to come and fight against Jerusalem and to cause confusion in it. What better time to do it when the wall's not totally finished, when it's not totally built to its height? Okay? Let's do it. And we prayed to our God, verse 9, and set a guard as a protection against them day and night. Again, Nehemiah and the city are praying. They're praying for God's protection. But they're not just praying and sitting back on their haunches doing nothing. They set up guards around the tower, around the city, day and night. They are taking action. Verses 6 through 9 of 1 Peter. Humble yourselves, therefore, under the mighty hand of God, so that at the proper time he may exalt you, casting all of your anxieties on him, because he cares for you. Isn't this what we're seeing Nehemiah and the Jerusalem inhabitants doing? They're praying to God and putting everything on God. Take care of us, help us. Casting all their burdens on him. Why? Because God cares for us. Verse 8. Be sober-minded, be watchful. Your adversary, the devil, prowls around like a roaring lion, seeking someone to devour. Resist him, firm in your faith, knowing that the same kinds of suffering are being experienced by your brothers throughout the world. You know, whatever the problems are that we might be experiencing here in Spokane is happening around the world. There's suffering from those same kind of experiences. But we need to trust in God that he will always be there. Verses 10 through 11 of Nehemiah 4. In Judah it was said, the strength of those who bear their burdens is failing. There is too much rubble. By ourselves we will not be able to rebuild the wall. And our enemy said they will not know or see till we come among them and kill them and stop the work. Listen to Satan working on the people of Jerusalem who are working on the wall. He is doing his best to stop them in their tracks. He is doing his best to stop the work on Jerusalem. Have you ever heard the comment of, how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. Okay? And that's what we're seeing here, is that they know that they can't stop the wall. They can't go against it. They've already got the wall up. Well, let's go in by false information. Let's work at them, on their minds. Let's do what we can to stop them. But again, they're praying to God to continue their work. Verses 12 through 14. At that time, the Jews who lived near them came from all directions and said to us 10 times, "You must return to us." So in the lowest parts of the space behind the wall, or in open places, I stationed the people by their clans, with their swords, their spears, and their bows. And I looked and arose and said to the nobles and to the officials and to the rest of the people, "Do not be afraid of them." Sometimes when we're doing work, we need a pep talk. We need somebody to build us up. We've been doing this for so long. We're getting all this negative impact. Look at this rubble. That's a lot of wall they have to build, and these big wooden gates. And you start coming down on yourself. And we need that pep talk. And that is what Nehemiah is doing here. And I looked and arose, verse 14, and said to the nobles and to the officials and to the rest of the people, "Do not be afraid of them. Remember the Lord, who is great and awesome, and fight for your brothers, your sons, your daughters, your wives, and your homes. Don't be afraid of them. God is great. He is awesome. Fight for what is right. Okay? Fight for the people around you. Protect this city. It's coming back. The Lord wants it to be back. Let's fight for it." Verses 15, 16, and 17. When our enemies, Sanballat and Tobiah, heard that it was known to us what they were planning on doing, they know about it, and that God had frustrated their plan. Remember those prayers that Nehemiah and the Jews were praying to help them? Well, what happened? God frustrated their plans to attack. We all returned to the wall, each to his work. From that day on, half of my servants worked on construction, and half held the spears and the shields and the bows and the coats of mail. And the leaders stood behind the whole house of Judah, who were building on the wall. Those who carried burdens were loaded in such a way that each labored on the work with one hand, and on the other hand was their weapon. So they were willing to do all this job, do all this hard work, but they also knew that there might come a time to where they were going to have to fight. So they had the hammer in one hand and a sword in another, a saw in one hand and a spear in the other. They were willing to do what needed to be done in order to complete Jerusalem. Let's go to Ephesians 6, verses 10 through 13. Finally, be strong in the Lord and in the strength of his might. Put on the whole armor of God, that you may be able to stand against the schemes of the devil. Okay, here we go again. The devil's out there. He's working on who he may devour. And we need to be ready to fight him. Verse 12, for we do not wrestle against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the cosmic powers over the present darkness, against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly places. Okay? Therefore, take up the whole armor of God, that you may be able to withstand in the evil day, and having done all, to stand firm. The belt of truth, the breastplate of righteousness, shoes which are the readiness of the gospel of peace, the shield of faith, the helmet of salvation, and the sword of the Spirit, the word of God. We need to be armed with all of that every day, because we are going to face the devil at one time or another. Verses 18 through 20. And each of the builders had his sword strapped at his side while he built. The man who sounded the trumpet was beside me, And I said to the nobles and to the officials and to the rest of the people, the work is great and widely spread. We saw the map, okay? Inside the town, inside the walls, there's a lot of people out there doing a lot of work. It's spread out. And we are separated on the wall, far from one another. In the place where you hear the sound of the trumpet, rally to us there. Our God will fight for us. So they were fighting the wall. They had the hammer in one hand, they had the sword in the other, and they had people on watch. And whenever they heard a trumpet blare, drop that hammer, grab your swords and your armor and whatever, and head to that trumpeter and fight. You know, we need to do that today as Christians. There are times when other churches cry for help. I know down there in the South we hear that a lot whenever a tornado hits or a hurricane hits. You know, people hear that cry and they'll get their motorhomes and their trailers or whatever and go down there with their hammers and their saws and will help that church, the family, recover from that. I told you how my parents were a part of the sojourners. And they would go and do World Bible School training. They would go and do vacation Bible schools. They would go and help camps that needed work done, areas that were destroyed, by whatever natural disaster. They heard that battle cry and they were willing to pull up with their motorhome and go help these people. We need to be willing to do that, as we see here in Nehemiah. And then our last scripture this morning are the last 3 verses of Nehemiah 4. So we labored at the work, and half of them held the spears from the break of dawn until the stars came out. I also said to the people at that time, let every man and his servant pass the night within Jerusalem, that they may be a guard for us by night and may labor by day. Remember, we read at the beginning to where the people from the outlying areas were coming in and helping. And he was saying, bring all those in to the city for safety, for one, but also they can help us guard the city. It's easier to guard the city with 200 people than it is with 100 people. 100 can sleep while the other 200 watch, or however many. And so bring them in so we can labor by day. So neither I, nor my brothers, nor my servants, nor the men of the guard who followed me, none of us took off our clothes. Each kept his weapon at his right hand. In other words, they were always ready. They were always ready to fight the devil. They were always ready to fight their enemy. Okay? Brothers and sisters, that's a huge statement to us today in what we need to do. We need to always be on guard, because you never know when the devil's going to strike. You never know when your brother or sister might need you to help them to get through a hard situation or a hard time in their life. We need to always be ready. What have we learned from these first 4 chapters of Nehemiah? First and foremost, we need to pray. We need to continue in prayer. We need to open ourselves up to God in prayer and ask for his help. Secondly, we need to recognize that our God has given us gifts, and we need to utilize them to the fullness of his service. Thirdly, we must not allow people to hinder our work and our service to God. We must be willing to stand firm and do whatever it is that God has called us to do. Fourthly, we must be willing to stand up with our Christian brothers and sisters and support them in their endeavors. We must be there, shoulder to shoulder, helping each other in our struggles and work for the Lord. And lastly, we need to stand together and fight the devil and his demons. We must fight constantly to stop Satan in his tracks and not let him win against what it is that we are doing for God. Next week we will continue our study some chapters, like chapter 3, we're not going to be going through all of it. There's another chapter that deals with a bunch of names, another chapter that deals with a bunch of numbers, and how many people worked on this section or whatever. We'll skip through those and just bring out the main sections of Nehemiah. But if there's any way that we can help you today in your walk with life, let us know. Let us help you.